Hello and welcome everybody for another show of MEDtalkx, broadcasting live on Pendle Community Radio, or WAS 103.1 FM. Today it's a very topical area that we're going to be discussing. We're talking about cinemas, their role, the importance, as well as the challenges facing ahead. So please do tune in to our YouTube channel. So do search for MEDtalkx, that's MEDtalkx with an X, and you will see me and Fahim actually wearing our new branded kit, which looks quite nice actually. But yeah, we've also got Facebook, so please do interact and we will ask questions to our guests. So a couple of numbers. We do have a studio number, which is 01282 723 455. And our WhatsApp number is 07522 723 455. Over to you, Fahim.
Thank you, Mehran. I'm really excited to have Stephen Evans and Midhat Khan with us this evening. Stephen Evans has many hats, but he's one of the founders of the Block Community Cinema in South Manchester. He's a community project manager and also has a thriving YouTube channel called Writing with Steve. And they come out with weekly information and guidance, which I was just watching just before tonight's show, so well worth a watch. And Midhat Khan, who I've known for decades, actually, I should say, is a personal family friend, an online film journalist and celebrity YouTuber. So a warm welcome to both of you, and I hope everyone listening and watching's got their popcorn for this cinema experience tonight. So let me start with Midhat, if I may. Midhat, you're a celebrity YouTuber, so what does that mean? Are you a celebrity or are you YouTubing celebrities? What does that mean?
I YouTube celebrities. I go down to film premieres or comic conventions, and I take videos of them just hanging out with fans.
Sounds fun. And what got you into this, Midhat? What drove your interest into films, that passion?
The passion to get videos of celebrities.
Yes.
Well, the passion came from my lifelong ambition of watching them on TV, meeting them and saying hi. But I found as I got to meet them, it was actually quite a fun hobby. And I started putting it on my YouTube channel, and I started getting quite a few views. So I just carried on with it. It's good.
Great. And over to you, Stephen. Can you tell us a bit more about Block Cinema and what that means?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for the invite tonight. Well, we founded the Block Cinema last year, and we started showing films in November 2019. So the Block Cinema is a community cinema. It's based in South Manchester in Northern, and it was created through the work of the social enterprise I run, but also the Withenshaw Community Housing Group and the support of local councillors. And that's what the Block is. It's called the Block Cinema because it's run from a public utility room at the base of a block of flats in Northern. So, it's in fitting that we called it the Block Cinema after that. And what we do, because it's community, it's very at the heart of the community. That's everything's really geared around showing films that people want and people suggest. We were showing films once a week. Every week we would show a new film, and also we would take on board what people wanted to watch and start showing some of those films if possible as well. So it was really to try and engage as many people in the area, and also to offer something a little bit different than mainstream cinemas could offer.
Yeah, great. So if I move that to you, Midhat, so with your, as you said, kind of catching up with celebrities, etc., what is it that you try to offer, and how do people benefit from your interactions?
Do you mean on my YouTube channel, or do you mean the celebrities themselves?
No, I guess it's because obviously you're posting things out, and people do watch, and they do appreciate the stuff that you do. What do you think that's addressing? Obviously, there's curiosity, but
I usually get quite a lot of interesting videos. For example, the celebrity is being extra nice, or they're doing something kind of unique or interesting, kind of like a tabloid thing. I usually put it on my YouTube channel. I get quite a few views for some of them, but sometimes I also get scoops. One of the actresses from a TV show called The Witcher, we were talking with her one night, and she wasn't sober, and she started telling us stuff about season 2, which was pretty good for content.
Excellent. And Midhat, it's been a tumultuous week in cinema this week. Obviously, we've heard the news with Cineworld and the Prime Minister asking us to go back and watch the films. What's your take on the actual where cinema is heading now?
Well, it's not looking good. So far, Picture House, Cineworld, two of the biggest ones have just pretty much closed down, and then the only ones we've got left is Vu, and I think what's the other one? Odeon, and Odeon's only open in the weekends. From the look of things and the delays of like so many huge films like Batman, and even films that have been completed like Eternals are like delayed by a year. So it's I think they're hoping for things to calm down. I'm hoping it calms down so I can watch it.
And Stephen, for you, the future, where do you see, for instance, you've obviously got this independent film group with the Block Cinema, but what about all the streaming that's going on? There's Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney, and so much. I mean, people are talking about a clash between streaming and cinema. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, for one, I think it's really sad the news that's come out this week. I'm a great believer in the mainstream cinema, because I don't see a need to be in competition with the mainstream. We're such minnows to start with, and also I'm a Cineworld card carrying member of Cineworld. You know, I go to the mainstream cinema a lot because it helps me judge films that we may show at the cinema as well. And I went to see Tenet only 3 weeks ago. I went to my local Cineworld, and there were only 4 other people there in a very large movie theatre. So you can tell people are very reluctant to return to the cinema. And I received an email today from Cineworld, just saying that they're going to close their doors on Friday. So it's worrying times. It's uncharted. Hopefully, it's a temporary measure. But again, cinema has always been in competition with another type of platform. I mean, from the 1950s, it had to compete with the rise of television and television going into people's homes. And that's always been a really good thing, that competition, because it's led to innovation. So, when television came out, it forced cinemas to think, well, what can we do that television can't do? So that created CinemaScope. It created color, films in color, and eventually 3D cinema as well. We had it as early as the 1950s. It pioneers ideas as well. So it's always been a love-hate relationship between TV and cinema. But it's always been a very interesting one because it's led to technological development as a result. So the new kid on the block has been, of course, the Netflix. It's been the platform like Amazon Prime. You've got lots of hosts of different platforms now. We've got Disney Plus came online earlier this year. So cinema's really got to work out a new strategy, a new way around it. I mean, it's tried IMAX. It tried lots of 3D cinema. That's not to say it can't do things better than home cinema, which again is another factor, something else it has to contend with. But it's going to be pretty difficult, and I think it was already in a difficult position, a difficult situation before lockdown, and I think lockdown's accelerated a lot and made some of these issues come to the fore a lot quicker, and that's probably thrown their strategies. I think the delay of the new Bond movie and the delay of lots of blockbusters has really thrown a spanner in cinema's works as well, because they were relying on people coming, customers going to see it. Because amazingly, I don't know if many of your viewers know this, but cinemas don't really make the money from ticket sales. They make the money from people buying refreshments.
Yeah, it's like petrol stations. They don't make the money from the fuel.
No, absolutely. And with very few people going to the cinema, That's causing the crisis, really, the financial crisis. So to answer your question, it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to work around it. I've got a feeling what they're going to do is to go back to some basics, but I also think they're going to become very more community facing as well. So going back to basics means I think you'll see the return of the double feature. I think that's going to return, that you're going to see 2 films. They may even have rolling times. So, people of my age will remember that you could go and see a film, and sometimes you'd walk in halfway through a film. But then you could wait and watch the first half of that film again. So it may be to create times that are more flexible for people. I think we may see the return of the matinee. Children's matinees, lots more family orientated films. I think you're going to see a lot more gaming stations there that people can go and use the internet, or they're using that space that they have. They've already tied lots of deals. So you go to the cinema, you'll normally find there's a Starbucks or a Costa there. You may, on the back of your ticket, see that you'll get a discount at the local, is it Frankie and Benny's or Nachos? These deals going on. I've noticed when I've been to some cinemas that there are particular mornings when you see lots of mums with the buggies and the children, because cinema has that kind of social aspect to it as well. So I think they're going to become more community facing, because they can offer things that home cinema and even Netflix at home and those platforms can't offer. So one thing is you have a dedicated theatre that's designed for sound and audio. Your home, unless you have a lot of money, you actually build a dedicated studio or film theatre, can't match the dynamics and the audio dynamics there. Also, there's a darkness with cinemas that is totally different from the darkness you'll have at home as well. So everything is geared around the projection of high quality video, but also that audio sound. So I think that they still have strengths. They've still got a few cards up their sleeves, but I think we're going to see cinemas adapt, and they'll have to adapt pretty quickly.
So Midhat, what's your perspective on what's going to happen, and also additionally there's an emergence of open air cinemas. That's something that I've seen. We've tried to actually get tickets for that, because I guess that is potentially COVID secure to some extent, because it's you just sit in your car and you experience it through in terms of what you watch that way.
I think you mean like drive-throughs.
Yeah.
So but it seems like a good idea for there to be more drive-throughs. Right now in America, there's a lot more people going to drive-throughs. But then again, America has the benefit of having a lot of drive-throughs because it was such a big thing in the 50s. And it still stayed there as a niche market. But right now, it's kind of gotten much bigger. Film-wise, it doesn't look particularly good for cinemas here, because we don't really have that kind of advantage where we can. Like Liverpool, we have one drive-through, but it's not like in the best location. And when you have a drive-through, you want it to be at an angle so the sun doesn't really cause an effect on the drive-through. But even that one isn't at the most ideal kind of situation, because I went there to watch Terminator Genesis a few years ago, and it wasn't great. And the other problem is in America, they get sunshine quite often. We have like 200 days of like cloud every year. So like when we went, it was just raining and we could barely see anything in Terminator Genesis. The only things that would work on an outdoor cinema here would be like bright films, like Pixar films, like animated films. To put on a point what Steven said there, Disney and Warner Brothers, their marketing strategy is to aim at the matriarchy of a family, because usually it's the matriarchy that decides the entire family to go watch a film. So you get films like Mulan and other stuff, which they were hoping for. for everyone to aim for the matriarchy, so that it's like good value, good family friendly, everyone can watch it. So she decides who gets to go watch the film. Going forward, it's gonna, because it's so unstable right now. I can't tell where it's gonna go in the UK. In America, drive-throughs. Here, I have no idea.
I think in America, it's fair to say people are probably still going in comparison to the UK. And it's just really interesting, Stephen, about your experience with just 4 people in a cinema. Yeah, and I don't know if that's kind of self-inflicted because you do get a lot of unlimited membership benefits through that, and you're hoping that whoever attends actually buys the groceries, the refreshments, do you know what I mean, and spend things that way. So when was the last time you went, Midhat, in terms of the cinema? Because to be honest, I can't even remember. I think last time was Paw Patrol, maybe about a year ago, with the kids.
Yeah, sure, the kids. I think the last time I went was probably around February or March, but I can't even remember what I went to watch, because I usually have an Odeon, Limitless pass, which ideally, ironically, cancelled around February. So, but I can't remember what I actually watched. It was probably an indie film like Queen and Slim.
Right.
And Stephen, obviously, I know you're a published poet as well, and I want to bring some of that into tonight's discussion, how poetry can transcend, obviously, culture, and obviously, where does poetry sit in with film for you? Obviously, you've got these 2 passions in life.
Well, at a basic level, both rely heavily on imagery and visuals, but both have a different vocabulary, but they both have a different language, but both use a visual language as well. And if we're going back to basics, the history of film was based on visuals. Sound was not synchronized until the late 1920s. So for 30 years, cinema relied upon the visual side of its art form. And I think, looking back when those films were first shown and journalists were trying to explain to people what cinema was all about, the nearest they could come to is to say that cinema is the projection of dreams upon a wall, that it was the external manifestation of dreams shown and made visible. And I think there's that magic to films, and that magic is at its strongest in cinema. Which is like flying the flag for cinema. And I see those qualities in the visuals. I think that the amazing thing is when you speak to people, you tell them that when sound was introduced to films, the film industry were totally opposed to sound. They didn't welcome sound at all, because in a strange way, first of all, film was a art form for the masses. It was a very inclusive form because being visual, you could make a film in Germany, France, in India, in America, the UK, and you could tell that story through the visuals because you had to, but you can then just insert intertitles of any language and send that anywhere across the world. Whereas sound was a restriction, because then the studios had to spend a lot of money on subtitles. It meant that film had to go into these huge hangars. It was the end of maybe filming a lot on location, because you needed these giant boxes and rooms to be next to the camera equipment. So it was a restriction, and also it ended the careers of many actors. When I say actors, I mean male and female, male and females, because once they spoke, the audience were absolutely shocked that the voices may not be the voices they expected. So for those reasons, it's like going back to the idea of language being written language, but also the images that writers use as well. Cinema sits really comfortably with writing, and it can also be cinema has also created writing as an art form, the screenplay, a whole new genre of writing. And also it can be a prompt to writing as well. Films, very cinematic writing. And I think sometimes my background was in teaching, is when we used to have, we was teaching English to lots of children. One thing we had to say was to remind them that these are generations that have grown up with cinema and with television. So the tendency was always to write about the visuals of what they saw, and they completely left out the 4 other senses. So it was always a reminder of how subtly sometimes the power of the image and cinema and television can affect us.
And for you, Midhat, obviously, I know you're familiar with the medium of comic books quite a lot, and there has been a lot of crossover with comic books and the film. What made you get into comics, and how do you think that's lent itself into transposing into films as well?
Well, I mean, I've always read comics. From what I remember, my grandfather used to read to me Tintin when I was about 4, and I carried on buying comics. And when I moved to the UK in '89, that's when I discovered comic book shops, and that's when I started buying comics more regularly. And throughout that time, I just liked the superhero, the superpowers. It was pretty cool. But I think it was inevitable for superhero films to become like a genre because it's action-packed and it's the special effects that really draws people in. And so as the special effects got better and better, they became easier to be transitioned into film. And then more and more people just started watching it. Now we got into a stage where it's so proficient that we can explore other themes where traditionally we explored all the cliche themes like superheroes, superpowers, whatever the masses wanted. Now it can get in a little bit deeper than it used to be able to, especially with like TV shows like Watchmen, which has gotten quite a few awards recently.
And what other kind of themes or stereotypes do you think it tries to address, Midhat? When we think about cinema, when we think about there's almost a very much a social responsibility when releasing these things.
I think Marvel's doing quite well recently. Like Black Panther, R.I.P. Chadwick Boseman, was like the biggest like black superhero film since Blade. Blade was pretty big in '99, which kind of helped basically movie studios realize that it was time to start making superhero films. But it wasn't particularly deep until recently. Now with Black Panther, it kind of went into identity. It went into African identity. It went into American identity. It went into like a conflict between Chadwick's character, T'Challa, and Michael B. Jordan's character, Killmonger, and the differences and the history that happened between Africa and America to create the story that we have. But right now we're also getting stuff like Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, and we're also getting Shang-Chi with Simu Liu, which I'm looking forward to.
I don't know what other people's perspectives are, but certainly with Black Panther, it felt as though it was the duality of the good blacks versus the bad blacks. A lot of that kind of that feeling kind of resonated, and also the way they attacked towards the end of the movie. There was kind of making those kind of animal noises, and the kind of subtlety in how they portray that. I personally think, it's great that they actually put it on, and actor with that kind of ethnic origin took the lead, but I still think there's a long way to go, because a lot of it, I just felt it was a lot of Lion King, to be honest. But that's my perspective. I don't know what you thought, Stephen or Fahim, because I think Fahim, did you watch it? I think
Black Panther. Yeah, I've seen Black Panther. I think there's so many different takes on it. Obviously having a black star of the the thing, like a bit like Tenet, who, you know, people are calling it like the Black James Bond, obviously having the main casting person as a Black character and speaking in a non-anglicized form of English to give it that African authenticity was important. And I think it made a lot of difference to many people. I know a lot of people, and probably the outpouring of grief for Chadwick's death is maybe a barometer of what it meant to so much people in terms of an advance in cultural milestone. Although I accept fully that it wasn't perfect and there are drawbacks. What did you make of it, Stephen? I'm assuming you watched it as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think all those. I mean, I think it's great that we are using every form of writing and every source of material. I think when I watched the latest films, Black Panther in particular, I think that the graphic novel is a great source for storytelling. I agree with all the points that you mentioned about it. I also think that there are, you know, going at the theoretical level. People say there's only maybe 7 stories, and everything else is a variation of them. But those stories and whoever tells those stories and those narratives, it's really important to see who actually controls that storytelling and from whose perspective those stories are told. So that's why I enjoyed Tenet for that as well, and I enjoyed that collaborative process, and Black Panther for that too, because I know you mentioned there are elements of The Lion King in it, and I think, well, yeah, and that's probably because most stories, they are derivative, aren't they, from a source. But it's very important that that everybody has a chance to tell that story as well, and their own spin on that story, to take ownership of that story. And looking at the graphic novel, the graphic novel that struck me, which was an amazing adaptation, was Watchmen, the movie version of Watchmen. And, you know, it just said that this is a format and a genre, the graphic novel, the comic, that is capable of nuance and making really serious points, as Midhat just mentioned about the latest movies that are coming out now. And I think, talking about, you know, Black Panther and looking at the industry as a whole, we are very Hollywood centric sometimes. And a very interesting story was when I used to teach film to my students. We used to start the first lesson with a questionnaire, and one of the first questions was, "Do you watch foreign movies?" And, you know, nearly everyone put, "No, we don't watch foreign movies." I said, "Well, do you not watch American movies?" "Yeah, but they're not foreign movies." Well, so again, it's a way of seeing. And another thing that amazed them was the fact that the largest film producer in the world is India. You know, India, Mumbai, you know, massive. You could place Hollywood in a fraction of the studios and the infrastructure of movie making there. And the second largest film producer is Nigeria. So sometimes when we talk about film, we do have this tendency to look westwards and not really to take in that, you know, the whole history and the context of the film, of the history of film as well. I mean, it was fantastic that Parasite, you know, waved the flag for South Korean movies as well, because, you know, they've been producing great films for the last, you know, 3 decades over there as well, as Japan as well. So it's really good, and I hope that's a trend that continues, that we hear more voices telling these stories, and a change of narrator.
Just following on that, Stephen, you talked about the role of the block trying to address loneliness, isolation, as well as mental health problems, which is very personal to both. It appears very personal and important to you, but, you know, both on an occupational as well as personal level to me. So how is that what's the interface to try and get that addressed that you found, and because I take it you've obviously got a membership, and they want to talk about certain topics, or they want to talk about certain movies. So could you tell us a bit more about it?
Sure. Well, what we can do as a community cinema that maybe mainstream cinemas can't do is that, well, first of all, pricing. We've priced it as such that for the films that we show, most of the films we show, we charge £4, and that includes refreshments plus popcorn included in that refreshments. And what we also do that's different is that we start each show with a very short talk about the film, an introduction to the film with no spoilers, I assure you, but we do discuss the film and a little bit of trivia about it too. And then if it's a long film, we'll stop for an interval and a chat and a drink. And also at the end of the film, invariably we'll stop and we can gauge the audience's reaction and maybe have a little discussion over some more refreshments. So it's a very more kind of personal way of showing film. It's a more open way of doing it, whereas cinema is kind of impersonal and more transactional. So that's something we can do, and that's a way of attracting older people to it, because we think low income as well, but really it's also to attract younger people, because we found in our community there's very little for young people to do in the evenings. There's lots of youth centres have closed. We see lots of children, young adults congregating on street corners, and they're not doing any harm at all, but sometimes people are kind of fearful of young people all gathered, and it's usually because there's nowhere for them to go or something to do. So the cinema, one of its aims was to match older people with younger people, try and bring them all under the umbrella of coming to see the film and challenging some of those stereotypes about older people and younger people. And I was looking at the Office National Statistics figures, which was looking at loneliness. And although I think it was published I think the survey was undertaken between the 3rd of March and 3rd of April. It did show that it's the age group 16 to 36 are the people who are now suffering loneliness and feeling it more, what they call they divide into chronic loneliness and lockdown loneliness. And I mean, that wasn't longitudinal. So, I mean, that was very early on. So I'd imagine the figures are going to be far higher. They found 5%, which hadn't changed from earlier surveys of loneliness. But I would say that was probably because it was only the first 4 weeks of lockdown. After 6 months and all the uncertainty of, are we going through a second phase again of lockdown, and how serious will this lockdown be? I should imagine those figures have gone up substantially. But you'll probably have those figures at hand anyway, and maybe offer a different perspective. But they're the ones I've been going off, which was it was an unexpected finding for me, because I expected it to be a category of older people. I expected it to be people who were living alone. But I think what threw me was the younger bracket of people who were experiencing loneliness seemed to be far more than the middle-aged people to older category.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Stephen. And yeah, as you said, that kind of very is the right word, temporal? It's just a very temporary state, isn't it? And sometimes when you're kind of temporary states with a lot of uncertainty, there is a risk of mismanagement. And I'd like to see what the update to those statistics were, but on a professional level, which probably Fahim can obviously correlate with. Unfortunately, there's a huge rise in isolation, desolation in some instances, and the associated difficulties that brings. I guess moving on from that, if I bring you in, Midhat, so we talked about Black Panther, which is Black History Month, and the importance of what cinema brings. Which kind of movies does spring to your mind that you'd recommend listeners and viewers to watch, especially during that kind of phase?
Well, last week I watched a couple of films I think would be quite useful for Black History Month. On Amazon Prime, they released Queen and Slim. So, starring Danielle Kaluuya and Jodie. I forgot what her last name was. And it's basically, this would go in line with the Black Lives Matter movement, where a couple, a black man and a black woman, were driving down at night where they were basically harassed by a police officer who went crazy, and to save themselves, they had to kill the police officer. So they ended up going on the run in their car for like throughout the country, trying to get to a plane to like go to Cuba was the plan. And while they were traveling, something interesting happened where they started to become a folk legend, where everybody they met, whether black or white, they met people that supported them and didn't support them. They became kind of like a symbol of what was going on in America, which I thought was quite well. It was quite in good timing, really. And then there's another film that I saw on Netflix. It's more of a children's film called Vampires in the Bronx. So it basically follows these kids as their whole neighborhood starts getting gentrified, but you start to find out that the gentrification is being managed by these vampires, and they have to defeat the vampires and save their community, which was quite amusing. That was a comedy.
Excellent. And Midhat, in terms of obviously foreign films, what Stephen alluded to earlier, I think it's fair to say what Stephen was saying is that we have a huge diet of Hollywood films, and even the other two industries that Stephen mentioned, India is nicknamed Bollywood, again, from the Hollywood, and also the Nigerian Nollywood, again, and Lollywood, I think, for Pakistan. So, I mean, they all seem to be variations of that sort of a background. But where do you see world cinema as it sits, and what's influenced you from the world?
Well, cinema-wise, I usually like much older films, but for example, I like surrealist films. So I used to watch quite a lot of Jean-Luc Godard and Louis Buñuel. But recently, I'd say I'm more drawn. Actually, I did see one Nigerian film recently called Nigerian Prince, which was about a story about a Nigerian scammer who meets his American cousin, and he basically shows his cousin around Nigeria how he's scamming people. That came out on Netflix last month. But normally, I think the other world cinema I saw was probably a Korean film. It wasn't Parasite. It was Train to Busan. So, the whole zombie genre exploded in America. So obviously everybody else is going to get in on it. And Train to Busan is probably my favorite. It's about these zombies that attack Korea, and they have to get to Busan on a train while being chased by zombies across the country, even on a train, which I'm guessing Steven's seen it.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. It's a fantastic film.
Excellent. And Stephen, we've had Midhat selections for Black History Month. Could you add a couple more maybe for the audience watching and listening?
Yeah, I think I've chosen some older films and some mainstream American films, because I think they have the largest reach, but I think they do make worthy comments. So the first film I'd recommend is Lincoln, because Lincoln charts the machinations, the political machinations between in 1865, at the time of the Civil War, to drive through the legislation to pass the 13th Amendment, which was the legislation that freed the slaves. And I think it's a timely reminder to people that that legislation was driven in the face of the fiercest opposition you can imagine. And it took all the wiles of everybody both white and black politicians like Frederick Douglass, for example, to ensure that passed through. And I think that there's a message for everybody in that film, that in the sweep of history, democracy has been an aberration. It's been an exception to the rule. And it kind of counsels vigilance to ensure things like that never happen again, and that we must always protect our freedoms at all costs. So I think it's worthy in that respect. I also, going back to another American Civil War film, earlier film, Glory, which again, why I like that film is because it charts the establishment of the first Black Union regiment to fight in the Civil War. And why I like that film is that it tells sometimes a forgotten chapter in American history, but also it shows lots of films have always depicted Black people of the time as quite passive, that war is being fought and they're just bystanders, where it shows that the Black people fought in that war and they sacrificed their lives for freedom. They were proactive, and that it was through their energy and drive that secured freedom as well. So I really enjoy, I always think that's a worthy film as well, to remind people of that message as well. And the last film is kind of totally different. It's called Cane River, and it's got a long pedigree. It was made in 1982. Unfortunately, the director died that year. He was only 41. It's got an all black production team, all black cast. It's set in Louisiana in 1982, and it's a love story. But it's a very interesting love story because it really it highlights the difficulty in trying to take a unitary definition of race and blackness. Because, for example, the two star-crossed lovers in this story, Peter and Maria. Peter is from a Creole background. He's from an affluent family in Louisiana. They own tracts of land, and they were the Creoles who owned slaves themselves. Whereas Maria comes from a working class black background in Louisiana, and whose descendants were slaves. And it shows you the very difficulty of defining identity, because it shows you their differences in terms of class, background, religion, and the family tensions that arise from them getting together in this film. And it's got an amazing soundtrack as well. It's got a really beautiful soundtrack. It was home produced. You've got a flavour of that period and a flavour of Louisiana and New Orleans as well. So it got disappeared. It was absolutely derailed because of the death of the director. The Criterion Collection have restored it, and it's only been released 2020. So it's a gem of a film, and I would thoroughly recommend that, because I think it's great as a starter for encouraging discussion and debate.
I think you raised an important point, Stephen, just about the importance of music. The composers for the movies. But is there any movie that really sticks out for you when we think around music? Is it the music that defines the movie, or the movie is, just happens to be I guess that what I'm trying to say is, where does music actually sit in terms of priorities? Because for me, when I think around, a lot of the movies that I really enjoy, I only today found out that Lion King had Hans Zimmer perform. But let's say, Schindler's List, Gladiator, they had Hans Zimmer, as well as The Last Dark Knight Rises, which is an epic movie. So what's the role of the soundtrack when it comes to cinema?
First, I want to say a little about something about Hans Zimmer. He's an incredibly nice man.
Yeah.
If you ever get the chance to see him on the street, say hi. He'll always say hi back. I've met him so many times. Always nice.
Wow.
But other than that, I can't remember where, because when I did film studies, I can't remember what text it was, but I remember somebody saying that after the invent of sound into cinema, sound counts as 60% of the audience's experience. So all the emotional nuances kind of just comes there. But I always think of film with two different kind of scores. One, you've got your Hans Zimmer score, film, an epic film with an orchestra and stuff. But then you've also got your popular film that reaches more of a younger audience. So I'm thinking like old 90s, like Fight Club had a pretty kind of like modern soundtrack from like different artists and stuff. So it really depends on what the target demographic is. With like films that usually hit the Oscars, it's usually like a Hans Zimmer level kind of cinema. But really recently, I think scores have become more important in marketing of films, especially superhero films. Whereas in the past, like the 2000s, Spider-Man films usually had like pop music playing. But now we've got like Alan Silvestri and other composers like Hilda, who did the Joker soundtrack. They're kind of turning it into more of a deeper and more emotionally engaging thing for the audience, especially with like Hilda winning the Oscar for Joker. I was really surprised. I especially liked how she kind of played her own story within the soundtrack. Like the Joker had its own story about him, but then her soundtrack started playing on it. So first we think Joker's crazy. Joker has like mental issues, but then if you start paying attention to the sound, at one point when the Joker, I have to say spoilers at this point. So when the Joker was in the elevator and he was talking to the girl, which we later found out was all part of his imagination, there was like this non-diegetic sound and music that was playing in the background. So later we find out that's like a clue to him being crazy. But when we're on the train, when Joe kills those two guys, just before he kills those two guys, more non-diegetic music came up before they came up to him. So there's a possibility that maybe they never attacked him. He just imagined it because he was having a bad day and he got fired and he wanted an excuse to kill somebody. Like he was always a psychopath. So the role of music isn't just like giving you a mood, but it's also giving you a different story.
Oh, that's interesting. And I still remember me and my friends playing football, and we used to, on the drive, it was like a 3-minute journey. We used to listen to Salif Keita, Tomorrow. I don't know if you've heard that heard that score, but it was Muhammad Ali from the movie, and it was the one where he goes out running in very early aspects of in the day, and then he suddenly had lots of children from the neighboring communities join him, and it was just it's quite motivational. It just there's obviously that sense of nostalgia when you think about the best movies, and obviously Muhammad Ali when Will Smith,
so is that your workout music?
Well, if that means that I'll work out for 2 minutes and 15 seconds, then yes, that's the one.
I'm more of an Arnold Schwarzenegger Total Recall kind of guy.
Okay. So that sounds pretty intense. I haven't seen Total Recall, but but there you go. So I don't know, Faye, do you have any specific movies that stick out for you in terms of the best movie? And I think you did allude to the movie before.
Yeah, best movies. I think there's so many, isn't there? We're probably going to do a round robin through all of us. I think there's different genres. If I was to pick out for me, ones that had the most memorable is sometimes to do with the experience that's involved with the film and not just the actual film itself. So for me, one was you may or may not have heard of The Message, but that was with Anthony Hopkins a long time ago, and it's a religious type, but it shows the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but you can't show him on a picture picture, so they have to use shadows in other ways. And so I like the way they got around this theological problem of how to showcase it on the cinema, as well as showing the whole film to an audience. I remember exactly where I was and when I was watching it. I was 17, a long time ago, and it really stayed with me. And it was something I could come back to. And I think last year or the year before, they made it into a 4K film in Dubai and things. So it was interesting to see how that changed. So sometimes it's not just the film, what it stands for, but the memory you have with it. So for me, that's one of the standout films that I remember. What about you, Stephen? Do you have any standout films? Are they the way I express them, the memory of other things around it, or is it just the film itself that you remember?
No, I totally agree. Yeah, you have lots of memories, don't you, associated with films, for sure. I think sometimes your film choice and your favourites kind of change and shuffle around depending on the mood and the feelings you're having at the time. I mean, there's some really classic films. I really enjoy some of the classic films. I enjoy Citizen Kane. I like Hitchcock's films, like Vertigo. I really enjoy that, where you have reality, but you have that kind of psychological edge to films as well. So very much dependent on where I am. I know they sound like the kind of highfalutin films, but also I like Pixar films. I really like those family orientated films too. They all play a special part, don't they, in people's growing up and lives too.
Yeah. What about you, Midhat? Any standout films that you'd want the audience to maybe look into if they don't know, or perhaps even rewatch if they have seen it?
I mean, I'd like to think I don't have one favorite film, but a good entry point to every genre. Like Hitchcock, like Steven said, I'd say one of my favorites would be Rope, which is based on a true...
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, you remember that. It's basically an early experiment into a one-take film, whereas back then they could only film 15 minutes at a time, and Hitchcock did enough tricks to make it seem like it was one seamlessly long film in just one take. And this was like 1950s.
Yeah.
This is how far back we're going. And it was based on a true story of these two philosophy students who killed somebody and left him in a table, in the dining table, like a cupboard, so nobody could see the body, and everyone had dinner. And they basically debated like the morality of whether or not they should kill somebody. And this is based on a true story, which is why it was so effective, especially with Hitchcock and his ability to create suspense the way he did. It also stars Jimmy Stewart as their teacher, who was teaching them about morality, but once he found out what they did, he was pretty much shocked at how sociopathic they became. So for Hitchcock, I'd choose that. For something more technical, say 3D cinema, I would probably choose Spider-Verse, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I don't know if you've seen it in 3D, but if you watch it in 3D, it kind of creates some really interesting animation styles and perspectives and depths, especially in that final fight sequence where everything becomes really surreal and colors are just flying at you. But if you watch it in 3D, it's all at a different depth. And I don't know how long it'll be before somebody can really top that in 3D cinema.
And Mehran, you're not going to escape your chance as well.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And it really depends on your mood, what you're in the mood for, and then that kind of dictates. At the moment, obviously, kids take a large part of my day, and I do remember that there's this beautiful movie. It's a Persian movie called Children of Heaven. I think it was released in '97, and it was nominated for Best Foreign Movie. I don't know if it actually won the award, but just the pure innocence of that movie, it just cut through the stereotypes and everything. It was just about this boy called Ali trying to get these red shoes that Zara accidentally lost because there was a beggar on the street who actually accidentally took her shoes away. So it's kind of his journey of trying to address that without telling his parents, he went through his own kind of trials and tribulations. He's a young boy, and how dejection came with glory and gratification as brother and sister. So it's a beautifully written movie. It's very very cinematic in terms of how it's done. So that certainly stands out. And one of my personal favorites, Training Day. I just love Denzel in that movie. Just the power. And when you talked about art, control by the artist itself, there was various different endings in that movie, but he wanted that specific ending, which is what happened. But just the way it was directed. There was a poker scene. I don't know if you guys have watched it, but the actual the people that facilitate that discussion, they had to be creative and not let Jake know the whole scene. So he's actually he was quite anxious. He was anticipating. He didn't actually know what was going to happen during that scene. So that just added that kind of tense feeling. So lots of movies, but those two tend to stand out.
Good. That's an 18 rated film, just for those of you who are kids out there. Training Day. Stephen, I do want to ask you, because you're involved obviously with the film in having your own independent cinema, the question of diversity has come up, and that's because of the new BAFTA chair. So obviously Mr. Mojumdar, you may have read his letter that he gave out to a lot of the BAFTA members. It became public, but he was basically trying to put a spotlight on diversity in cinema, the problems that they've had. Obviously the Me Too movement had a huge scandal with Hollywood films in terms of male domination and using their power, the poor representation of female maybe actresses in terms of pay compared to men, and sort of this sort of thing. What do you think it brings to the picture, having a BAME person as a chair of a BAFTA in more than over 70-year history for the first time?
It'll be interesting to see, won't it? It'll be interesting to see how what I would dearly want to see is that this is not just a public relations exercise. I want this to be something of substance, where it's going to have those positive results that people are it's raised a lot of expectations. So I hope then that this that the new chair gets support and gets supported in any initiatives that he and his colleagues want to enact and encourage.
Good. And Midhat, for you, what about, have you noticed any of the institutions like the BFI or other things? Do they play a large part in your life and as actually heralding change or beacons of hope for you?
I'm hoping they will, because obviously in the past they haven't been the best at representing, especially in UK cinema. So I'm hoping that the new rules that they've decided to implement actually forces directors, specifically casting directors, to look harder for people of BAME to actually represent different films, different producers, even behind the camera as directors like Steve McQueen. More of that would be nice. But ideally, my experience of basically being around BAFTA people and BFI, it is dominated male and it is dominated white. There's very, very little, especially in the UK, with the industry people I see. It's not as diverse as I was hoping it would be.
So, yeah, so I guess we also have to be mindful of the time, and it's just been a fascinating kind of whirlwind discussion around cinema, its roles and importance. Stephen, I guess any kind of take-home messages that you'd like to share with the audience? I know you've talked about some important movies to consider watching, but also you're very much geared into the importance of art, writing, and what it means to other people.
I think, generally speaking, I think anything that's geared towards creativity and maybe doing something creative, even if it's writing, something, journaling, note taking, just to be occupied And one thing we've overlooked today is that we can become our own filmmakers too. Is that, you know, the power of the industry has waned because of the smartphone and reasonably cheap cameras. And go and film, go and make your own films, go and document yourself, go and take those selfies, be proud of yourself and your lived experience, and document yourself through your homemade films too, and load them onto YouTube.
Yeah, no, great advice, Stephen. What about yourself, Midhat? What would you like to add?
I guess support as many diverse films as you can on streaming services, since that's all we've got right now. That way, it'll show people that that's the kind of content that the audience wants, and it'll kind of put companies in a position where they start looking for diverse films. That's what I hope for.
Yeah, and you know, the hope is that we continue to promote understanding, tolerance, as well as, you know, give that artistic license for an array of different ethnicities to be actually, as Stephen puts it, just be cascaded onto a screen, so that, you know, it's an opportunity of learning. So that's the hope. It certainly has provided that in the past, but certainly we don't know what the post-COVID era, or the, you know, we're still in COVID, I guess. We still don't know what that means moving forward. Stephen, you're about to say something.
No, I was also, it just reminded me of a film, 1941 film called Sullivan's Travels, where Sullivan makes comedy films, but he also wants to make the one movie that's going to be worthy and serious, and he wants to call it Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And of course, the Coen brothers riffed off that. You know, they used that for one of their films. So Sullivan wants to make this, but he's kind of being pigeonholed as a comedy director. So he goes on his journey. By the end of the journey, he realizes, because it's a time of the Depression, that in times of trouble and tribulation, people don't want the serious messages. They don't want to be preached and lectured at. They want films that bring them joy and entertain them and make them laugh and smile. So I'd also recommend that people check out some of the great comedies out there and films that are uplifting and inspirational too at these times.
Yeah, certainly Norman Wisdom seems to spring to mind. Yeah.
Musicals as well. I mean, talking about different platforms, Hamilton that Disney Plus are showing, it's the film version of the stage production, is absolutely astounding. It's amazing, and it will give cinema, you know, a run for its money, and shows you those alternatives, like Midhat's just been saying, you know, check them out. And the lyrics are so clever. And what it also shows is, if you told that story to a group of younger people maybe they could consider it a dry textbook, they're not going to access that. But again, the power of cinema and the moving image and musicals all combined to tell the story of Alexander Hamilton and his times and the context is fabulous. It's amazing. So I couldn't recommend that highly enough.
I was watching Hamilton again this morning, just like songs again. And I came across a video from 2016, an interview where they were saying that it was the most successful Broadway play since the 60s when Camelot came out.
Wow.
So that was 2016, and since then it's even bigger.
Yeah, it was the hottest ticket, wasn't it, on Broadway and then the West End in London. So to actually be able to see a version of it in film is fantastic, because some people will never have the opportunity to see it live. But it's an amazing, it is an experience. You really need a good sound system and maybe a big screen to appreciate it too.
Great. So I think it's coming up to the end of our show, Fahim. Do you want to perhaps tell the listeners and viewers what we've got in store for next week?
Yeah, so next week we're talking all things policing, completely changing tack, but also with an emphasis on Black History Month. We hope to have John Williams, who's a police sergeant in Merseyside Police, and also Meb's a retired police officer. So please do join us for an hour next week. end this week's show by giving my heartfelt thanks to both Stephen Evans and to Midhat Khan for spending the last hour with us. If video did not kill the radio star, then definitely streaming will not kill the cinema star. I leave you with that, and good evening, and thank you for watching and listening. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.